The median 401k balance for an American worker between 55 and 64, someone who spent an entire career contributing, following the rules, is approximately $185,000. At a standard 4% withdrawal rate, that generates $7,400 a year. That is not a retirement. That is the output of a system 70 million people trusted. And the question worth asking is not why individuals failed to save more. The question is why the system that replaced guaranteed pensions produces that number as its median result. The answer is a specific history, and it changes how the whole thing looks. The 401k is not a retirement system with some problems. It is a tax shelter that was repurposed into a retirement system, and that distinction matters more than almost anything else in this conversation. A tax shelter and a genuine retirement system are not the same engineering problem. One is designed to defer taxes for people with surplus income. The other is designed to guarantee security for people who will one day have no income at all. The 401k was only ever solved for the first one. Everything downstream from that, the fee structure, the liquidity lock, the tax uncertainty, the sequence risk, is a consequence of applying the wrong architecture to the wrong problem at enormous scale for 40 years. When Americans reach retirement with insufficient savings, the diagnosis is fast and consistent. You didn't contribute enough, started too late, withdrew early, made poor investment choices. That explanation is not entirely wrong, but it doesn't explain the pattern. If the shortfall were primarily behavioral, the distribution would look different. More people would be getting it right. The median balance at retirement age would sit somewhere more survivable than $185,000. The fact that the person who did everything correctly still frequently arrives at a number that generates less than $8,000 a year points to something structural underneath the behavior. The fees quietly compounding against the balance, the tax promise built on an assumption nobody can verify, the liquidity lock that makes the account's own money cost more than a third to access in a crisis, the sequence of returns that can unmake 30 years of discipline in a single bad year at exactly the wrong moment. None of these are personal failures. They are design features, and they were not accidents. In 1978, Congress passed the Revenue Act. Section 401k was a minor provision written to clarify tax treatment for deferred executive compensation. It was not retirement policy. It was a loophole, a mechanism for highly paid employees to shelter current income from current taxes by pushing the liability into a future year. The people who drafted it were not thinking about assembly line workers or teachers or nurses. They were thinking about executives with more income than they needed in a given year. 3 years later, a benefits consultant named Ted Benna read the provision and realized it could be interpreted more broadly. He designed the first employee 401k plan, got IRS approval in 1981, and within a decade, corporations discovered something far more valuable than a tax benefit for executives: an exit from one of the largest liabilities on their balance sheets, the defined benefit pension. Private sector pension coverage, the kind that guaranteed a specific monthly income for life, regardless of market conditions, covered roughly 38% of American private sector workers in 1980. Today, that number is under 5%. The collapse happened in near-perfect, inverse proportion to the rise of the 401k. That is not coincidence. It is substitution. The pension was a corporate liability. The employer bore the investment risk. If the fund underperformed, the company made up the difference. The employee was owed a defined benefit. The 401k eliminated that obligation entirely. The employer contributes a match dash sometimes and is then absolved. The employee manages the account, bears the investment risk, absorbs the fees, makes the allocation decisions, and receives whatever the market delivers. If it's enough, fine. If it isn't, the company's responsibility ended the day the match was deposited. That transfer, guaranteed institutional liability converted to individual uncertainty, executed across an entire economy in roughly 20 years, is the mechanism everything else flows from. Fee drag is the most invisible force in the system, which is precisely why it works so well. Most 401k participants don't know their total fee load. The disclosures exist, but they're distributed across documents most people never read completely. A typical combined fee fund expenses plus administrative costs runs between 0.5 and 1.5%. annually. That sounds like a rounding error. It is not. Take $100,000 growing at 7% annually over 30 years with no fees, approximately $760,000 with a 1% annual fee, roughly average, not high. The balance lands near $570,000. That fee consumed $190,000 in compound growth, not in charges you see on a statement, in growth that never happened because the fee took the base it would have grown from. That is 25% of the final balance, transferred silently to institutions that bore none of the risk and guaranteed none of the outcome. And it is structurally invisible. The balance shown is always net of fees. There is no line reading amount paid to management this year. You see the number going up. You never see how much faster it would have gone without the friction. The second mechanism is less visible and more dangerous: tax deferral uncertainty. The 401k's central promise: contribute pre-tax now, pay taxes later, at a lower retirement rate depends entirely on something nobody can know: future tax rates. You are locking in a current deduction in exchange for a future obligation set by legislatures that don't exist yet. For many retirees, the assumption doesn't hold. A sizable 401k balance combined with Social Security and required minimum distributions kicking in at 73 can push income into brackets higher than expected. The tax shelter becomes a tax liability at the exact moment income is fixed, and there is no way to negotiate it. And then there is the lock. Your own money, earned, contributed, compounding for decades, costs you more than a third to access before the age of 59 and a half. A $20,000 emergency withdrawal nets approximately $13,000 after the 10% penalty and federal income tax. $7,000 gone for accessing your own savings during a crisis. The system is not built to help you through a hard period. It is structured to penalize you for needing one. The vesting trap compounds this. Many employers require 2 to 4 years of service before their matching contributions fully belong to you. Leave early and you forfeit part of the match. A calculable dollar cost attached to every job change, invisible in the moment, but real in aggregate. People stay in underpaying roles, decline better opportunities, absorb career stagnation, because leaving means leaving money behind. The employer's generosity is real but conditional. And the condition serves the employer's retention interests at least as much as the employee's retirement. The pension system the 401k replaced had genuine flaws. It excluded many workers, tied benefits to tenure in ways that hurt nonlinear careers, and could fail when companies went bankrupt. Those are real problems. What replaced it did not solve them. It dissolved them, dispersed across 70 million individual account holders with no actuarial expertise, no institutional investment capacity, and no protection from the most dangerous risk in retirement finance: sequence of returns. 2 workers, identical balances at retirement, identical contribution histories, identical average returns over their careers. One retires into a rising market, the other retires in 2008 or 2000 or early 2020 into a sharp decline. The second worker begins withdrawing from a shrinking portfolio. Early withdrawals at depressed prices permanently reduce the share count available when the market recovers. The math is irreversible. The portfolio runs out faster, not because of any decision made at retirement, because of timing no one controls. A pension fund absorbs this risk institutionally. It holds a pooled portfolio across a population of retirees at different ages, manages inflows and outflows collectively, and can ride out a bad year in ways no individual account can. The 401k places the entire exposure onto a single person at the single moment they are least able to absorb it. The corporations that eliminated pension obligations understood this transfer precisely. They converted a guaranteed liability into a variable, one, then labeled the conversion as empowerment, individual choice, ownership, control. The language of freedom applied to the assignment of risk. And because the outcome isn't visible for 30 years, accountability is structurally impossible. The executive who approved the pension switch in 1987 will never be linked to the retirement insecurity of the worker who followed the rules in 2025. The time horizon is too long, the causation too diffuse, The shortfall is distributed across millions of accounts and interpreted as millions of individual failures, which is exactly how a system avoids being held responsible for a collective outcome it produced. You are 34. You contribute 6% of your salary, the full match, because you correctly understand that leaving the match on the table is leaving compensation on the table. Your balance grows. The app shows a projected retirement number that looks roughly sufficient. What the app doesn't show, the 0.8% annual fee compounding against your balance every year for the next 30 years. The tax liability at the other end, calculated against rates not yet set. What happens to the projected number if the market drops 30% in the 2 years before you plan to retire? The app shows a number going up. The mechanism underneath it is not visible from the interface. At 42, something happens. Medical, job loss, family, the specifics vary. You need $25,000. Your 401k has it. Accessing it costs roughly $9,000 in penalty and taxes. You withdraw anyway. The long-term compounding loss, not just the $25,000, but the growth it would have generated over the following 20 years, is substantial. You don't feel it at 42. You feel it at 65, when the balance is lower than projected. And the explanation is that you withdrew early, as if the lock structural cost played no part. At 61, you have $380,000. The market declines 28% over the next 18 months. You now have $274,000. The $7,400 a year number from the beginning of this video is no longer abstract. You did not make bad decisions. You did not fail to save. You were exposed to risks the system placed on you, risks the pension system would have absorbed institutionally, and they materialized at the worst possible moment. This is not an edge case. This is the median trajectory. The $185,000 average balance for workers aged 55 to 64 does not belong to people who didn't try. It belongs to people who trusted an architecture that was never designed for them. The 401k is not a bad tool for everyone. For high earners with genuine surplus, low-fee institutional fund access, stable employment, and other assets to absorb sequence risk, it functions adequately for what it was originally designed to do, defer taxes. The problem is scaling. A tax shelter built for executives was never redesigned when it was converted into the only retirement mechanism available to most American workers. The features that made it useful for executives, illiquidity, tax complexity, long time horizons, individual investment responsibility, became structural hazards for the population it was never built to serve. The pension collapse was not inevitable. It was a choice made by corporations, facilitated by regulators, framed as modernization. The risk didn't disappear. It was transferred. From balance sheets to kitchen tables, from institutions with actuarial capacity to individuals with a contribution slider and an app, you are not looking at a retirement system with some inefficiencies. You are looking at a tax shelter that was pressed into service as a retirement system and quietly blamed its participants for the gap between what it promised and what it delivers. The $185,000 median balance is not a failure of American workers. It is the output of American institutional design. Most people feel that as personal inadequacy. Now you can see it as something else entirely. If this video shifted something for you, if it named a pattern you've been living inside, without the language for it, there's one thing I want to ask. Not a big thing. The subscribe button is right there. One click, and the next time Clara maps out a system that's been quietly working against you, you'll actually see it. No algorithm, roulette. No hoping this channel surfaces again. Just, you're here, and the next video finds you. And if this one earned it, hit the like button too. It's a small signal that tells the system this kind of content is worth surfacing to the people who need it most, which, given everything we just talked about, is a mildly satisfying irony. Using an algorithm to distribute information about the system's algorithms usually bury. Share it if someone you know has been staring at their retirement account wondering why the math feels wrong. They've probably been blaming themselves for a system that was never designed with them in mind. This video is 14 minutes of evidence that it wasn't just them. We'll see you in the next one.